Are we good to start?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight for this Q&A session hosted by Match2Path, which is a great platform performed by volunteer practicing pathologists and trainees to help applicants and other pathology enthusiasts. So this session is for the purpose of helping applicants who went unmatched last cycles or previous cycles and want to reapply the upcoming cycles to kind of like get the questions answered. And also tonight we're joined by our amazing panelists. Which I'm going to introduce them. I'm following my screen. We have Dr. Kamran Mirza here. Welcome, Dr. Mirza. Dr. Mirza is an associate professor of pathology at Loyola University and associate program director of pathology residency. And also he's a co-founder of Match2Path. Welcome, Dr. Mirza, and I would appreciate if you could share a few words with us.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me and for that kind introduction, and to Match2Path for putting this together. I think, this is a somber topic. We're going to try and keep it as positive as possible because, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. All of us have had different experiences, and I'm happy to share mine as well. And so looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. And next we have Dr. Beshai. Dr. Beshai is an assistant professor of pathology. He's a program director of cytopathology at Roswell Cancer Center. And also he's a great mentor at USCAP and also a delegate of New York State in the CAP House of Delegates. So welcome, Dr. Beshai, and I would appreciate your welcome message to our attendees.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Yasmin, and thank you to Match2Path for having me on this panel. It's definitely important to share our experiences, especially those who are in the position of directorship or participating and seeing the issue from a different perspective. But at the same time, we were in that situation at some point in our life and our career. So we're trying to combine both together and give you an honest opinion and advice. Thank you again. Thank
you for being here. And also our next panelist, we have Dr. Casey Shuko. He's a PGY1 in his transitional year and also an incoming PGY1 pathology at BMN Royal Oak. Welcome, Dr. Shuko, and we appreciate your welcome message.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me a part of this. This is definitely kind of echo the words so far. This is definitely not, I think, the easiest of topics, but hey, listen, you just gotta hang in there, and I think hopefully we'll be able to bring some collective words of wisdom, things to keep in mind, and just hey, life sometimes throws you some difficulties, but the attitude and the approach that you put forth and towards those adversities that come out on top ultimately. So yeah, looking forward to this discussion.
Great, thank you. So our last panelist would be Dr. Amber Mahbub. She's a medical graduate from Sharif Medical and Dental College. She's an incoming PGY1 pathology at University of Cincinnati. Welcome, Dr. Mahbub.
Thank you for having me on this panel. I would love to share my experience as a candidate who went unmatched twice. So I would like to share my experience to help people who are in the same stage. I hope I could answer some questions as well.
Thank you so much. I'm sure your experience would be a great help for other applicants on the same track. And also, before we proceed to the questions part, I want to shout out to Meredith Herman for her huge help and support for this Q&A session, and also Dr. Bascoda. Thank you so much. Dr. Bascoda is an assistant professor of pathology at University of Columbia and founder of Match2Path. and a big support for all the applicants. And we always have your help. Thank you so much, Dr. Vascoda.
Thank you, Yasamin. I'm really grateful for collaborators like you and Casey and Meredith, all of you who are in this call, for making Masterpath as dedicated to the applicants as we can make it. Thank you, Dr. Mirza, for your time. Thank you, Dr. Desai, for being here. I'm really happy to connect with another cytopathologist in the same call. And thank you, Anwar and Casey. I'm going to mute myself and remain hidden. I'm going to hand over to Yasamin. But before that, let me put 2 words about Yasamin. She's a graduate from Iran University, and she's an incoming EZY1 resident at Miami University. Yasamin, platform is all yours.
Thank you so much for introducing me. I was it's actually my pleasure to be here and experiencing this Q&A session as a moderator. So before we proceed with the rest of the session, I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping stuff. Please feel free to drop your question in the Q&A box, or just put it in the chat. And if you're willing to have your question answered by a specific panelist, please don't forget to mention their name or just direct the question to them in the chat box. And also I want to mention that this session will be recorded and will post it on the Match2Path website for further use, or for those who couldn't attend this evening. And also one other thing, please don't forget to follow Match2Path on social media, on Twitter, and check our website for more source of information for upcoming match cycle. So I think we're good to move toward the questions. We have a couple of questions submitted, and also I'm sure we were gonna get a lot of questions during the session. So to start, my first question is that how can an unmatched applicant recover emotionally from that unsuccessful experience, and how can they get back on track and move toward the next cycle?
I think I'll get the ball started here, and I'll keep my comment brief. I think one of the biggest things that helped me personally was just let time, I think, ultimately kind of do its thing. When I kind of got the news I didn't match, I was in the middle of rotations, and I know kind of a lot of people are in that. You still kind of finish up medical school, or maybe you're doing a postgraduate, or whatever the case. Life is busy, things are going on. But just giving yourself the time that you need to heal, to let things digest, be open and honest. A huge shout out to my preceptor that I was rotating with in the clinic that month. He said, you take the rest of the week, be with your family, or do what you gotta do. And I think that's something that helped me out personally, was just, allow yourself to take the time that that you may need to, just to let things process. And if you have difficult news like that, and if you're in a working situation, or a school situation, or a postgraduate situation, whatever the case may be, if you need to take some time, let your preceptors, let your attendees, let whoever it is know that, hey, this happened. Can I take some time? That definitely meant the world to me, and ultimately I was able to kind of process, digest things, and move forward after that.
Okay, thank you, Casey, for sharing your perspectives. And I'm going to move toward the next question. So the next question is that, what does a program look for in our application during the match cycle? Is there any specific points they're looking for?
I can take this question, Yasamin. So basically, what a program in pathology is really looking for, to your surprise, and that's just based on my experience in my residency program, and I was a chief resident at some point, it's not actually the scores. So scores, yes, plays a very important role, but for some reason, pathologists would like to see applicants who like pathology and who are interested in pathology. So make sure that your CV is really showing this strongly. not in the personal statement, in the actual rotations you did, in the jobs you took, in some participation in publication or a paper with someone, in any studies. I mean, I know people who were PAs, pathology assistants at some point, and they were willing to take the medical school to become pathologists. So that proves the genuine interest in the pathology field. So anything that can highlight this clearly, that would be important. Second thing, to be honest, is step 3. And that's something we might discuss multiple times during the session. But this is something that worries the minds of the program directors. Would this person be able to pass step 3 while being in pathology, dedicated time, reading only in pathology? Would he be able to pass questions in OBGYN or intensive care unit or ER? So they prefer actually to see that you have completed and passed step 3. And the last but not the least, for sure, is the scores. But again, as I mentioned, I have seen that it's not the top priority. And of course, if you can get connections from the pathology field, that plays a role as well. I would just add one more thing about the first question, how to emotionally move on, is actually to expect that this might happen. I would say, yes, we all hope that we would match from the first time, but practically speaking, yeah, there is always a chance to miss the match. And that's why when you rank your list, you always think like, would I rather be in this program, which I did not really like, or I would risk this and prefer to wait till next year? Or maybe I put all my options, but I still don't match. So something mentally to be prepared for. But on the other hand side, after you recover emotionally, think of what else could I do in my CV for the next year? What could make it different? Because if it stays the same, the chances might be the same, like there will not be any improvement. So, and that's why this webinar is of big value, because it's the right time now to think what else you can adjust before the next application time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bashai. Is there any other points our other panelists wants to add to this question?
So I think it's a tough question. I think Dr. Bashori really answered all of them, from the program's perspective. I guess I'll just chime in to say, for the first part, the emotional recovery. I mean, it's, I think Casey really put it well. I think everyone grieves in different ways. And so I think it's important to know, kind of what your process will be like. It'll be different from mine, for example, or Casey's or Umber's or what have you. And I think that it is, to be honest with you, both those questions are related in many ways. Why? Because the process of your grieving, whichever amount of time you take, is also linked to you now reapplying and looking at your application again, right? And so you do want to obviously take the time you need to mentally recover, but you also need to strategize whichever way you think is best in order to either reapply or not. I mean, depending on what you want to do next, right? And so I think that if I was to look back at my time, so I had matched in pathology residency right out of medical school, and I had a visa delay. Couldn't control it. In July, my visa had not come. It was delayed by a few days, and my residency kicked me out without waiting for my visa. So effectively, it was July 4th or July 5th, and I was sitting abroad alone, and not alone, with my family, of course. And it was horrible. I mean, I think that if I look back at that time, and if I was to write an autobiography, I would have a whole chapter, which would be just black pages, because it was just horrible. I didn't know what to do. I had no support. There was no match to path. There was no inside the match. There was no connectivity like we have right now for that to happen. And I think that what cannot be stated enough is the support that I got from my wife or my parents at that time, because it was incredibly important for me to feel supported, because I really felt like that is what I had gone towards, and basically I had lost it, right? And so it was horrible, and I didn't want to match again. So my process was that I don't want to do residency. and I want to do research. And so I changed routes and I went into a PhD and I did a PhD and then I started residency again. So that was my journey, right? It might not be like your journey. It might be completely different, but what I guess I want to say is that you aren't the first person to go unmatched and you won't be the last person. And so there are mechanisms in place for us to all kind of recover and to ask for support. Please ask for support and appreciate the people who are there for you in those times. Really, I think it's a grieving process for more than you alone, right? It's for the people who are around you. As for the program, I think that Dr. Bishoy really set it correctly. I think that at the end of the day, there will be, and I think that there's a Q&A question as well about someone who was on the rank list, and obviously the program matched before they hit that rank, and so you have to remember it's a numbers game. Just because you didn't match doesn't mean that you weren't on rank lists. You might have been on rank lists. You might have been on multiple people's rank lists, except that the way the match worked is that those institutions filled before they got to your rank, right? Now, that's something that, you may know, you may not know, but you can't really base any decisions on it. The important thing is to remember, think about it as a program director. When you are reapplying, if you are a program director who is looking at an application from a person who is reapplying for residency, what would you want to see? Right? Let's be practical. What would you want to see? What would you want to see? How they recovered, how they addressed the fact that they went unmatched, what they did in the meanwhile, and how their application is different from the time that they applied the first time, right? So it's not rocket science. Program directors are human beings. They're very kind and nice human beings. They want to incorporate everyone into their program, but they can only take a few people. So ultimately, I think that if you think of it from that perspective, then hopefully you can line things up according to what is needed to be done.
Thank you, Dr. Mirza, for very practical points you all mentioned. So following from there, the other question that been asked couple times is that how can we improve our CV for the next cycle, as we know there are only a couple months left till September, and what can they do in order to make a difference in their application for the next cycle?
But do you want to take that, Dr. Mehboob? Do you want to take a stab at looking at CVs, what you can do differently, perhaps?
Sure. Since I was just a candidate, so I cannot be sure if my strategy worked or not from program director's perspective, but I will share what I did. So after going unmatched, I took my time to process that, and I agreed with my family. Same as you said, Dr. Mirza, that I had very, very supportive family and people around me. So it helped me get back on my feet very well. And then what I did different was I did not have US clinical experience in pathology because COVID happened when I was initially applying. So there were not many opportunities to do that. So that's what I did first thing. And during those rotations, I tried to connect with people more so in a way so that I could stay in touch with them in the long run, and we can work on things together. And that helped me a lot. Other than that, I worked on a couple of research projects that were strictly pathology oriented. So my CV was really speaking to my intention to join pathology by the time I was applying for a match. And what I did different as well was I was a shy person. I did not used to connect with people as much because that was just not me. So I changed that as well. I tried to connect with people, and they helped me in shaping my CV with better words and shaping my experiences in a way so that the next person reading the CV would like it or would understand. And that really showed through in my interviews as well, because a couple of interviewees told me that my CV was very well constructed, and they knew that I was going to join pathology for sure.
I love that. If I can just echo that, Dr. Mehboob, I mean, your experience is actually very important to hear, right? Because the success that you or Casey have had, that is the success that people are looking towards, right? They're looking to be inspired by you. And I love the point that you raised, the fact that, if you have an interview and you go unmatched, it may not be that the CV needs work. I mean, you need to obviously work on your CV, right? You need to show another year of work. But I have to say that in this process, do what Dr. Mehboob did. talk to people who you trust, and don't have an ego problem about the things that you can probably make better. It is much more than just the CV, right? Your personal statement might be important. Your scores obviously may or may not be important. I mean, you can't change scores at the end of the day. But what you perhaps can change is how you approach the interview. Have you mock interviewed with people? Maybe you come across as being someone very quiet and that's not how you are. Zoom interviews, people are getting better at it now, but it's not natural for everyone to interview on Zoom. And so perhaps you weren't able to reflect the excellence in your application in your Zoom interview. And the only way you can fix that is by getting over this, you need an activation energy. So reach out to people, whether it be Twitter, whether it be your own network, and see if you can do mock interviews with people and really ask for honest feedback. That honest feedback, it might sting. Some people might say, you come across as very flat, or the environment that you're sitting in isn't well lit, or you're not able to express your love for pathology. Those are the important things that you have to hear, right? Like Dr. Mehboob is saying, her CV was better constructed. She got US clinical experience. Obviously, she had enough about pathology even before, but ultimately the package was such that she became, she matched. And so I think that you have to think of multiple things, and you have to try and make sure that all of those things are altered to reflect the excellence that you bring to a program.
If I may add one quick thing, speaking like from an active person in CAP and USCAP, they also provide mentorship programs. And especially in CAP, they allow actually mock interviews to happen during the time of the CAP meeting. So maybe you can consider something like this and see how people, because they are not judging you by any means. They will just provide their input. If I'm in that situation of interviewing you, what would I think? Do you need to do anything or alterations in your CV? How about your interview skills? What do you want to be prepared for? And so on and so forth. So check those. They are also helpful tips too.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Bisha, if you don't mind, could you just elaborate a little bit on those opportunities? Because we've been asked multiple times about how to initiate those connections, applicants sending multiple emails to different programs, faculty members, and they're so busy to answer those emails, and probably they have unsuccessful attempt of trying to make those connections, but they can't. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit about those opportunities at CAP and those mentorship opportunities, I mean.
So I will start with the USCAP. So it has something already structured. It's called USCAP Mentorship Academy. And it's 1 year cycle. So you start and you put your preferences as either an applicant or a resident who is looking for fellowship. They have multiple levels of mentorship, and they match you actually with someone from their program that has the same interest. So for example, if I'm doing cytopathology, they try to see if someone who is currently a resident who wants to do a fellowship in cytopathology. If an applicant, then for sure they can match with someone who is more integrated in the teaching or the leadership. And they follow with you throughout the year. What is the updates in your CV, what they have done differently. They can direct you, they can connect you with some programs that can give you an an insight of what they prefer in their applications and so on and so forth. For the CAP, from what I know so far, it's mainly during the time of the annual meeting itself. So they accept applications. You can go on the CAP website and find that mock interviews area. And during the annual meeting, you can go, and I've seen many medical students or graduates or foreign graduates who participate in the CAP meeting. And some of them are actually interested in doing these mock interviews with some faculty. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for the explanation. And also moving toward the next questions, one thing that I would appreciate your comments on is about the personal statement. like how they can improve their personal statement and how they should mention about like an unsuccessful experience or about like the previous cycle? Do they need to like elaborate on and explain the reasons that why they didn't get matched, or what is your suggestion? Dr. Mirza, if you.
Sure. I think, Casey, do you want to say something? Do you want to go?
You know, I was about to say, and I'm also going to throw a huge shout out to Dr. Mirza on this one. I think this might get into another question about like mentorship and mentoring and just being, you know, influential person. And so I know Dr. Biscola, Dr. Bishai, I mean, you can't do this alone, people. And that's one of the biggest things that I learned from out this process, right? That it's about your village, right? It's about the community. It's about you putting yourself out there and just taking in the advice and getting to know one another and building those relationships, right? That was one of the biggest things for me. And that's something that it just resonated. I think it more so clicked the second time around, right? And the personal statements, whatever had happened before, that was in the past. My focus was what's the here and now, and what's the process, and what have you learned, you know, and I think that as Dr. Bishai, you know, said earlier, you know, what are your interests in pathology? How have you been able to get involved, and what'd you learn about it, right? You know, like for me, I long story short, I ended up actually applying for a different field my first time around. Match week kind of came and went. Didn't match into that initial, what I thought I wanted to do initially. So I used the time just to reflect, put everything back on the table and say, man, what do I actually really like? What am I actually really interested? Why was I interested in this first field in the first place? You know, and the things that actually drew me into that field, as well as all other fields and surgery and medicine, and, you know, and GI and whatever, right, was the pathology, was understanding disease. And me as a football player, a former football player, that's a very visual, conceptual, you know, love understanding how the pieces kind of all fit together. It clicked, right? And that's what my personal statement was about. And I put my personal, I can put a link to it as well in the chat, because I figure, you know what, you need those experiences, right? And you know, you need those examples. And I think that's something that I think really helped me out too, right? But again, you gotta tell your story and tell it in such a positive light, and focus on the here and now. And what did you learn from all those tough times? You know, how did you grow as a human being, right? And it's corny, it's cheesy, it's what they say in the movies, but it's kind of true. You know, it really is. And I think that's where that time to reflect and to, like I said, build those connections, build those relationships, put yourself out there. And I tell you what, I would try to reflect that in my personal statements. And I think this second time around, it was a time around that was meant to be for me. You know, I think as it is for everyone, where the match works and in our favors eventually, right? So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
I agree with this point of view that whatever happened in the last year is gone. And if you think that putting that story in the personal statement is a proof of your persistence and resilience, you can show this in the interview or in different ways, because simply you don't know exactly why you did not match. It might be the ranking list, it might be some other factors. So we can't really bring a story into the personal statement when we don't know exactly what happened behind the scenes in the program. So it's better to like move on in a positive way, as mentioned. And if that happened as a question in the interview, that like, did you apply before? Did you go to other programs before, and so on? You can elaborate more at that time, but not in the personal statement. That's my opinion.
Right.
So I think that, so my answer is kind of a mixture of Dr. Bishai and Dr. Shuko's answers. If I can sense from your application, I mean, there's going to be no place in any application that's going to say that you didn't match, right? I mean, there's no checkbox that will show up to a program director, but it might become pretty apparent. You may have applied there before, you may have interviewed there before. And excuse me, just the way the timing is structured, it may seem that you may not have matched, right? And so I think that if there is anything that makes you non-traditional in the sense that, it could be a good experience or a bad experience or what have you, I typically jump to the personal statement to see if it's been addressed, right? But this is typically not for like being unmatched. For example, I don't know, if you had a DUI and it's a misdemeanor on your, application, then, addressing it in the personal statement and nipping it in the bud might be a good idea. And like Casey said, in order to spin that, you learned a lesson from it and this and that, right? And so it really depends on it's your personal statement. If you feel that addressing the fact that it's an elephant in the room and I want to talk about it, but I want to quickly turn the conversation around and make it a positive thing, like Casey's saying, then by all means do it, right? But it's a risk that you take. And in that setting, I think having multiple people look at it is very important, because the way it's like a text, right? And so the way you're saying it may not be the way it's being perceived by someone who's reading it who doesn't know you. So I think that there's something to be said about having it reviewed by people just to make sure that it's coming across appropriately. You can't come across as someone who is so depressed by it that you haven't been able to recover. You can't come across as someone who is so overconfident that, oh, I don't know what happened, but I'm pretty certain it'll happen, right? You have to come across with the correct tone. You have to, and that tone can only be that, it's generic statements, like, like Casey's saying, like it sounds cheesy, but it's actually very important to remind the person reading your application that there have been obstacles, or generic statements that whatever obstacles have been in your path, you have learned and grown from all of them, and you are a better, stronger candidate, right? Everybody wants to hear that. Now, whether you address it specifically or not really depends on your specific situation and kind of how good you are with telling that story and making it come across as positive.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for all the points and details. Moving toward the rest of the questions, I got a couple of questions about old graduates, like people with high year of graduation, specifically international medical graduates. What can they do to improve their applications? And also, like, another question following this question is that, like, doing another degree, like getting a master, a PhD, would it be helpful for them to get matched in upcoming cycles or not? Dr. Mirza, probably.
Okay, so I'll take a quick stab at it. So the first part of the question is about old graduates. Is that what it is?
Yeah, about the old international medical graduates, or even old American graduates. Because the year of graduation is something that as time passes, it's getting worse and worse.
Right. Oh my God, I feel so. This is a tough question to answer. Let me start there, okay? Because being a, let's say you're 10 years out of medical school. There's no one way to answer this question. What's important is, what have you done in those 10 years, right? If you have, for example, I don't know, done a pathology residency abroad, are a practicing pathologist, but are showing convincing reasons that you want to move to the US, and come across in your interview and personal statement as a collegial person who would get along in the US system, etc., then I don't think it's a huge problem. In those 10 years, if your life has had obstacles and you've overcome them, and you can address this in your personal statement that, life happened, COVID happened, what have you, and, now I'm back with a bang, and this is kind of who I am, and, bet on me. It may not be an issue. But if it's 10 years of you not doing anything, and I'm being as blunt and helpful as possible, but you not doing anything specific towards pathology, not improving your pathology-related application, then the chances of your matching, by and large, are definitely going down further and further and further. And at some point, as a friend and as a person who cares, at some point after a certain number of unsuccessful attempts, and I'm not saying 1 or 2, but I know people who've tried multiple times, like 5 times, 10 times, you have to step back and think about, is this investment of your money and your time and your life worth it? Or is it better for you to consider alternative paths, and there can be many excellent alternative paths, right, if you think about them. So I think that there's no one answer for everyone. I think it really depends on your situation. I think anyone who tells you that being an older graduate is not an obstacle is kind of lying, because I do think that it is something that you do need to not necessarily explain away, but you need to address it, right? Because program directors will have hundreds and hundreds of applications from people who are just graduating, who have done step 3 probably or not, have done a lot of pathology experience and have never gone unmatched, right? That doesn't mean that they're better candidates than you or worse candidates than you, but the way the match works and the way the whole process works is that fresh graduates, people who are just coming out of medical school, will likely have more chances of matching. Now, if anyone says that that's not true, I'm not, I think that it's definitely true to a degree. So you have to really weigh and balance where you are. If you are, let's say, more than 10 years out, have tried multiple times, have not been successful, then my recommendation as a friend and as a mentor is to make sure that you think of every option available and make sure that the investment in going back into the match is the right investment for you and your family before you do that. That said, if it's once or twice and, there are circumstances that that you can overcome, that, for example, it was COVID, you didn't have clinical experience, maybe your letters weren't as good as you thought, maybe people gave you feedback and you can interview better now, maybe you didn't apply to the right number of programs, maybe you only applied to 3 and you should have applied to 30. You know what I'm saying? Like, it all really depends. So I think that there's no right answer, and I think that there's no one answer for this question. That was me trying to be politically correct. So have fun.
Thank you.
I'll try to be politically incorrect too. So actually, yeah, it's a very tough question, because again, each program and each program director will look differently at things, and their priorities are different. And I have seen that myself in my program and then in the fellowships. But one thing that came to my mind is I know of some new residents who actually matched in kind of baby programs in certain states that, like, it's 2 years old, 3 years old program. Honestly, it's an option. Yeah, you may see it as, yeah, but I was hoping to get matched in that big program or that experience program that would make me connected to this and this and that. But honestly, by the time you finish your residency, you have other avenues to get connected to the outside world and to be through CAP or USCAP and getting your ways to the fellowships. And it could be an option. So honestly, I don't know how to find those programs. If someone in the panel can help with this. But I know that some programs are fairly new and they could be an option. And again, as Dr. Mirza has said, it's up to you to prioritize what you want in your life. If you think that putting yourself in a fairly new with low experience kind of program will not really satisfy you, then don't consider it, but at least be aware that this option does exist.
Thank you, Dr. Bishai. And also, like, another question is about the job opportunities, like the paid job opportunities, like the applicants can do or apply in meanwhile that they're preparing for the next cycle. For these like couple months, how can they do to kind of like financially survive the situation?
It depends on your visa, right? I mean, if you have, I'm assuming that this question is coming from an international medical graduate. I mean, visas that allow you to earn money are different from those that you study on. And typically that means that someone has to sponsor your visa in such a way that they can pay you. And typically for a couple of months, that's unlikely. Just being honest, it's unlikely for someone to, let's say, offer you a J1 and then getting a J1 visa to work and be paid may not be the right option for you, depending on what type of visa you want to work on during residency, right? And so there are all of those things to consider. Naturally, if you're a US citizen and you're already on the US soil, then you can pretty much do any job that you'd like to, provided it's aligning with your personal circumstance or professional circumstance. So, I mean, I think my example was that I got on a J1 and came as a postdoc, and then, started working as a postdoctoral researcher. But I was told very clearly by my PI that, he doesn't take on people for like less than a year if you want to do research, and bench research takes time. And so that's something I committed to. I switched to an H1 for, when I not an H1, sorry, an F1 when I became a PhD student, and then I switched to an H1 for residency. So it really is a very personal thing, and it depends on your circumstance, I think.
Yeah, and definitely this is a very important point you mentioned, that try as best to make that job aligned to the personal statement and the career. Like I myself also came here to the States on a H1 visa through a school that teaches medical assistance. And I use that in favor of my CV, that yes, I'm interested in teaching. And that's actually how it was perceived during my interview. If you can do research jobs, that's also good. If you had practiced pathology in your country, and you can use this for maybe a few months or a year as maybe lab technician or something, or try to take a temporary thing just to make sure that it fills the gap, but also in something aligned to pathology if possible, or at least in the medical field. That would be ideal. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rashid.
I'm about to say, is it okay if I add a different perspective to this one too? And I'm speaking from my own perspectives here as a U.S. graduate that reapplied. But my first year, this past year, I've been doing a transitional year, right? And a transitional year is basically, it's a medicine internship, right? And about, let's say, out of 12 months, like 4.5 months of 5 months have been inpatient medicine, a couple of other months of clinic, some like primary care, a month of surgery, a month of peds. But I had a couple months of electives, and I was able to kind of finagle my way, so to speak, and do a couple pathology rotations. And that was actually really my first taste of actual clinic, practicing pathology experience. Now I did a lot of stuff on Path Twitter, and that was me kind of getting my feet wet, so to speak, right? And for anyone who thinks that they can't make a Twitter account, or that they can't use social media for something that's like really awesome connecting wise and have some fun with it, shout outs again to Meredith Herman, shout out again to Dr. Mirza, everyone on this call. But that was something that it kind of put gave me some time to get some exposure, while also learning just about medicine, how to work in the hospital, and how to understand these different levels of communication, and where does your role fit as a pathologist to the hospitalists and to the surgeons, right? And so on and so forth. And I wrote up this thing for CAP about how I made the most out of my transitional year residency, right? And for those, whether you're a U.S. student that didn't match, or whether you're an international student and you're still looking for opportunities, you know what? Maybe it is possible to do, a transitional year internship. I don't know as much about the details of that. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas and options, because it's a year of medicine. And if you still have to finish up your step 3 exam or what have you, it gives you a chance to get some clinical exposure. You might be able to then do a pathology rotation, or at least get some work with the pathologist at the hospital that you're going to work at for a little bit, or you get a little bit of a different perspective, into kind of, what you do and the role that your work has, on kind of the other specialties, right? So just kind of throwing the transitional year plug out there, because it's good days, bad days, everything in between, but on the whole, definitely been an ultimately positive experience that I'm thankful for. I think each and every day.
Casey, I think that that's a wonderful point. And you and I have obviously talked about this multiple times. And I really do think that it'll, that experience in that year will make you an even better pathologist. There's no denying it, right? I mean, this fact that pathology used to be a residency that used to have a mandatory intern year, right? And so I think that it's very well aligned. Can I ask you a question? So did you SOAP into the transitional year?
So I did not SOAP into a transitional year, although depending on how I would have initially set my application, there's a good chance I could have, from my understanding. But so the way I did was, so I ultimately applied for an advanced specialty.
Right.
It's common knowledge. That's why I applied for dermatology my first time around, right? And it's an advanced specialty, so you have to apply for a transitional year or some sort of internship for 1 year, and then you couple it with the advanced program, which would then be dermatology, stars a PGY2. I ranked transitional years programs in my main residency match as well. And I think I'm going, that's Dr. Bisha on this one. There's a what if factor, man. Things may not happen. I may not have matched. And that was still in the back of my mind, even then, even this past, cycle, there is the what if. Things can happen, and you kind of have to try to be ready for them or prepare for them, right? So I ranked transitional years as well as my main residency match. And like I said, I'm happy I did, because, it's also kind of funny that now I applied, with my will-be wife, and we got in the same area, and it's like, sometimes things just work out as they're meant to, and you may not know at the time, but just keep your options, keep your doors open. You just gotta keep working hard at it, and up and above, just put yourself out there and try to be a good person at the end of the day, and things will work out as they do.
I really sincerely appreciate your input on this. I think that that plug that you're doing is a very practical one, sensible one, and I think that and it's something that can really easily fulfill that year, explain away anything else, and kind of give you time to do step 3. Like, there are many benefits to that year. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I'm telling you what, man. As someone who's got a wedding in another year and 3 months, this year is putting a lot of money towards that wedding. So you just never know. Hey, it's a good internship, and I think there's a lot of places that do soap the transitional year too. So I don't know, just keeping some things in mind.
Awesome, great. Thank you, Casey, for sharing all those points. I didn't know some of them. So I have another questions asked a couple of times about the number of programs that someone who is reapplying has to apply to. Like, do they need to apply more broadly, or kind of filter the more competitive programs and just apply to the less competitive one? What is the suggestion on those?
Dr. Mehboob, do you want to share your opinion on that?
Thank you for putting me in the spot. Actually, I applied to every single program that sponsored visa, because this time around, I was thinking that this is going to be my last time applying for a match. I wanted to give it everything that I had. So I applied to every single program. So maybe my advice would not fit those people who might have financial restraints. So someone else might help with that.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I really do think that, when people are looking at Casey and you, I think that it's very inspiring. And I think it's very important to know exactly what you did, right? I mean, it's, first of all, it's incredibly kind of you guys to kind of share your opinion, and kind of, but this is exactly what we're talking about, right? And so I don't have a good answer for this, but I would certainly say that obviously financial burden is a big deal, and you have to think about your situation. But you can't necessarily be very picky when you're going at it a second time around, right? I mean, unless, for example, you're doing it in a completely different way, like you're doing a completely different specialty or what have you, I think you can definitely have preferences. But my recommendation would be to try and apply as broadly as possible within your means.
Yeah, certainly you got to be more selective the second round, but of course, if places have their criteria on their website, and certainly you don't fall into that criteria, which is for them is the minimum, it might be not a good idea to put money into this, unless you have heard stories about people who have matched there that did not fill the criteria. Of course, the programs that are local in your address will take higher chance, because you can convince them that your family is there and you are there and you're available. And as I mentioned, try to find those programs that are new in the residency world, and put more focus and attention on applying there, finding who to contact there, and try your best with these programs. Otherwise, yes, if you can apply everywhere, that would be the idea.
Thank you.
Yasmin, can I just echo Dr. Bishoy's point? Like, he's absolutely right. If a program is saying on their website that this is their criteria, that is their criteria. Their GME looks at the criteria. Things don't get published unless that is the criteria. So often a lot of people reach out to me and they say, oh, well, the program said that, we don't consider people who are more than 4 or 5 years out of medical school unless they were like, doing another degree or something. Should I still apply? And it's difficult for me to say don't apply, but the reality is don't. They've told you, they've shown you their cards. In my time, there used to be people who clearly said that we do not accept applications from foreign medical graduates. I'm being honest with you. And even then I decided, let me apply. It was a waste of money, a waste of time. They immediately rejected me. And, and now with DEI and holistic review, things have changed, right, in the last 10 years. But if some place has told you that they have minimum cutoffs for step 2, they require something of this, they require that, trust me, they will probably follow this. And so, you have to think about the money that you're spending. So really, I think Dr. Bishoy's point is really well taken.
And I think also like one important question that probably will come along this line is, if I'm applying again, can I apply to the same program or not? My perspective is yes. If you know that you did well in the interview, if you were interviewed, that's different. Yeah, if you were interviewed before and you didn't match in that program, I would recommend to apply again. You never know where you were on the ranking list. So maybe there is a chance that they will like something in your CV this time, and they will have a discussion that, yes, this person is really interested in this program, and let's put him or her higher in the ranking list. And I have seen that personally in my residency program. But if they haven't interviewed you at all, and you check about like who they picked at the end or what's their criteria, as Dr. Mirza said, and found that like it's really not the appropriate place for you, then do not, if you applied to that last year. But if you have interviewed, and that's the main question, if I've been interviewed in that place, do I have the courage to send them my name again and my application again? And I would say, yes, please do.
Casey, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I kind of echoed, Dr. Mirza, Dr. Bishoy's point, and I think also, like, again, relationships are they're essential. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. I think something that I learned from this second time around, not that I did try to focus on, really connecting and getting to know others, but just like, and I think this is where past Twitter and social media has helped me out, is that, hey, I'm working on a full-time medicine intern. How else are you gonna still try to build these connections and build these relationships and still put yourself out? So again, there's a lot of people who are at programs, who are residency directors or the faculty or what have you, whether it's on Twitter, on LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. There's other ways that just, you might have to be a little creative with it. But just long story short, you gotta try to build relationships somehow and put yourself out there somehow and get to know each other, right? There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of people vying for those jobs, frankly, right? From just a frank standpoint, right? And there comes a point where, not one way, shape, or form, you just gotta put yourself out there and get to know one another. The more you can do that, the more you can put some time into that. Publications, scores, this, awards, all of that, it kind of falls in the wayside, at the end of the day. Can I work with you? Is this someone who, all of these interactions have been awesome, and I love seeing what you do, and this and that. So just relationships, key.
I will just comment one quick comment, because one of the online questions is talking about, okay, if I'm an old grad and I've done everything and I've tried the rotations and the research and everything, so please don't lose hope. Again, we all agree in this panel that each program will look at things differently. Maybe whoever didn't think that this is enough this year would have a different opinion. maybe a program has lost 1 spot or 2 spots unfilled last year because they were very picky and peculiar about their choices. This year, they might have loose criteria and they might consider you again. Or they might think that, yes, this is good enough. Let's consider this person for the interview. Once you are in the interview, and anyone can disagree or agree with me, but once you are in the interview, you have equal chances with everybody else who has been invited. So once you are in the interview, don't think backward and say, I'm an old grad, or I didn't do enough, or I'm not as good as people who did residency or practice in their countries. Don't think this way. Once you are selected for the interview, you have equal chances. Just prove yourself and show your personality the way like that can make you in for the ranking list.
Great. And also I can see a question on the live chat about the minimum number of US clinical experience. So what's the bare minimum, if any, in terms of US clinical experience numbers? And I got that question before too. So like, how many rotations do you recommend an applicant do?
You know, so this is an impossible question to answer. US clinical experience is definitely something that's touted as being incredibly important for everyone, but not everybody who gets a residency has done US clinical experience. So I would say that what they're looking for is your ability to work in the US clinical system, because they have no way of figuring out for IMGs what the medical school has prepared you for. They have no way to figure out whether your communication skill is at the level where you can work in the US. So ultimately, I think if you can get across during your interview, I love Dr. Bishai's point that once you've been interviewed, now it's like a level playing field, right? If you can get your point across that you can assimilate in their system, work well in their system, and work well with their residents, that is what at least I'm looking for. So to me, it doesn't matter if it's like 4 months of US clinical experience, 1 month, and frankly, sometimes even 0 months. It's more important, like Dr. Bishai had said before, I want to know that you really want to do pathology. If you really want to do pathology, and for example, you have no US clinical experience, but you are, you speak reasonable English and you have been working in your home institution in the pathology department for, let's say, 4 months, that may be equivalent to 1 month of US clinical experience. I mean, I don't know if the US clinical experience is a magic bullet. There are people who do months and months of it and still don't match. So I think that just take it with a grain of salt, that it's more indicative of your ability to work in the system, which you can perhaps show in different ways.
I got you. Thank you, Dr. Mirza. And also, Dr. Mahbub, if you don't mind, may I put you on the spot, because you mentioned that you did some US clinical experience and it helped you get matched. So can you kind of like explain a bit about that, like how many rotations probably you did and how much they helped you?
Sure. So I agree with Dr. Mirza's point. I made that mistake in the first or second math cycle that I thought, because I was not in touch with more senior people who could guide me properly. So I thought that since I don't have USCE in pathology, I may not be a good candidate for that specialty, even though I did have some experience from my home country in pathology. So I made that mistake and paid the price of going unmasked. If you have some experience from your home country, and I have a couple of colleagues who match with their home country experiences only. So it really depends if you have pathology experience more than having US clinical experience. In my case, I did 3 US clinical experience, like 3 rotations. 2 were in private pathology labs and 1 was in a residency program. So for me, it helped out in more in terms of getting assimilated in the culture and knowing how things work in US, and more so in terms of getting better at communication. Of course, like I got some letters of recommendation and I had great experiences over there overall, but it is not the make or break point for me. That's what I think right now.
Thank you, Dr. Mahbub, for sharing your perspective. And also, I think we're running out of time. I'm going to ask the last minute questions because I know like the supplement application is going to be hear this cycle. So like I've heard, I'm not pretty much sure about it, but I've got a couple of questions about the regional preferences. Like, should they mention about regional preferences in the ERAS application? If even if they are not like geographically restricted to an area, but they prefer a specific region. For example, I got a question that someone is in like Midwest. Should they mention that they are in Midwest and they want to stay or no? Dr. Mirza, probably you again.
I actually don't have an answer for that, to be honest with you. I have no experience with this. I don't want to misspeak. I think that you're right. It is going to open this cycle. But I'm not even sure. Like actually, Dr. Buscota and I were asking our GMEs before to see whether it's going to happen in your. Dr. Bishai, is it happening in your institution? Are you aware about the supplement and the indication and the tokens and all of that stuff?
Honestly, yeah, it's my first time to hear about this. I haven't encountered that situation before.
So Yasmin's point is that, and I'm just going to speak about it generally, in other specialties, it has happened that you have certain number of tokens to indicate that you might be more interested in this and that. And I think, to be honest with you, that is a whole hour of discussion. Like it's impossible to answer that in like a minute. And then also, I think right now, none of the pathology programs have any experience with it, and neither do any of the applicants. But I do know that Dr. Buscota and Match to Path have it on our agenda to do a separate session on that specifically, when it's closer to ERAS opening. And so stay tuned, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're almost, it's almost 8. Thank you. I want to just thank you everyone for sharing your beautiful evening with us. The panelists, thank you so much for your time, for your wonderful points. And I hope everyone could use it. And also we're going to post the recording on Match to Path website for those who couldn't attend this meeting. And also please don't forget to follow Match to Path on social media, Twitter, and don't forget to create a Twitter account. It would be a great help for all the applicants. This is the one recommendation I have. It's a very good point, good like way to make connections and be in the pathologist community. Thanks again, everyone. Good night.
You. Good night.
And if I may ask Yasmin,